All right, Black Britain. Here we wish to examine some of the issues surrounding the term African American. The term is not very old, perhaps 30 to 40 years old. Some say it was Jesse Jackson who popularized the term, no telling who actually coined it, but it was arrived at by trial and error. Going into those times, the terms black and African were insult terms. And now we love to use black empowerment, black this, black that, BLM, okay?
Besides, to them, you're not even American. You're not even African American. You're
The preferred terms were colored or Negro. With the awakening of some blacks who were still in racism-induced stupor during the worldwide independence movements and the civil rights movement in the United States, a new racial term was needed to unite the formerly desperate blacks in the United States, or so-called blacks. Logically, the things that could unite all black Americans was the fact that they were now Americans, and that at one time, irrespective of recent nationality, like all humans, they all originated in Africa. So the term African American was used occasionally at first, then as a standard term, because there was no knowledge of ancient black history. I repeat, there was no knowledge of ancient black history among the people who created the term, because there was no knowledge of ancient black history. Again, among the people who created the term, there was no thought as to what confusions and misconceptions caused by the term African American, because there's no history tied to these names.
This is an incident of American history that has been pretty much under the rug, but not so much hidden, just not available. The significance of it in terms of American history is large, because I think there's a great lesson in here to tell us who we are, who we were 150 years ago, 160 years ago, and who we are now as a result of that. Who we are is who we were, but if we don't know who we were, we can't really know who we are.
The whole idea of a Semite. Semites were people who lived in southwestern Asia, including northeast Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, who spoke Ugaritic, who spoke Ge'ez, who spoke Ethiopic, spoke Hebrew, who spoke Arabic. Those are our people. We are a Semitic people.
It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. Yeah. What can you prove, huh? Nothing. Where's your evidence, huh?
Okay, black, you can't trace that to one Pacific continent. You can't trace African American to one Pacific continent. Like I said, people of color are from all around the world. But yet, when they teach in these European, or excuse me, Caucasian institutions and schools, what do they teach so-called black people? That they are Africans.
Are you seeking forgiveness, Walter?
Forgiveness for what, Reverend?
Vivian said you told her that God is black.
I simply posed it as a possibility.
We don't speculate on God's color, Walter. If you ever want Vivian to speak to you again, go upstairs and tell her that God is white.
But we're really not sure. I mean, the Hindus don't believe it, the Muslims, the Buddhists.
God is white. It's simple logic. His son is white.
That's not proof. I'm white, my son is black.
Black Europeans or Black Indians, not Africans. As we continue along this page, the case will be made statistically that the majority of Black Americans, U.S., are actually Black Europeans, not Africans. You know that old slave narrative? You know, the slave master gave you your last name.
Do you know where you came from? What's your name?
Malcolm Little.
No. That's the name of the slave masters who own your family.
Williams, Brown, Thomas, Jackson, Washington. You know, they had all these big plantations from all the United States. And don't get me wrong, they did have plantations. But we kept these names because we were the original inhabitants of those lands. And they know it. And then get these little racist people that want to comment, you know, talking about you're African. Because they don't know nothing. You know, they got a low level of comprehension and they don't understand the totality of what's presented with facts. Okay. This is a truth that the albino power structure in Europe and the United States has tried very hard to hide through the miseducation system here in America, suffered by blacks as a result of the race wars of the 1600s through the 1700s in Europe. 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, that the albinos, or so-called whites, want desperately to continue to hide as religious and political wars. Think race relations are bad now? Okay. The average albino, or so-called white, is oblivious to true history, as most blacks. Thus, many scientific genetic studies have accidentally uncovered the fact that blacks in the United States are mostly of European extraction. Like I said, there's no such thing as a white gene. We come from those regions. History is whitewashed and a myriad of lies told on a magnitude, from NASA to satellites to fossil fuel and all the other stuff. Truman Show, like I said, the world is a stage. Everyone has to play their part. And this whole American dream is a false reality. It is one big hoax, one big lie. Keep the people asleep and keep the people dormant. Okay? Let me see. But the albinos innocently covered them up by saying that the overlap in statistics means that Black Americans must be of mixed race.
That baby's daddy. Any fool can see that baby belongs to me.
I want it different. That little rascal belonged to me. Proud to say, boss, I'm that baby's daddy.
I be the paw, boss.
I'm the paw of that there youngin', boss. I'm the pappy.
Remember the old age lie that, you know, so-called blacks have a different variation of pigmentation or lighter hue because they was raped by their slave master? No. I mean, that did happen in certain cases, but not on a magnitude, okay? No. All right. Apparently because that is all that they can imagine to explain the confusing data. There are many of these studies, and they all have one thing in common. When overlap is found between blacks and albinos in the U.S., the albinos, or so-called whites, always attribute it to admixture during slavery or after emancipation. The problem for them is that admixture between blacks and albinos, so-called whites, in the U.S. during slavery was very low. Yes, masters did use female slaves at will, but slaves were plentiful, not masters, and masters had wives for the slaves, okay? For the purpose of procreation, black females were mated with black males, okay? Right here, the Jacobite gleanings from the state manuscripts, okay? Let's see. colonies and plantations, a dumping ground for prisoners, the colonization movement, rebels asked for by American governor as soldiers transport contracts. Okay. Just going to read the highlight parts. The colonies and plantations had been for some time back the dumping ground for undesirables of all kind, convicts, state criminals, whether political or religious, rebels, suspects, malcontents, fanatics, and deserters. All right. Let's see. He adds an interesting fact that it was not till 11 years after the Union that Scotland sent her first ship across the Atlantic, and that in the West, owing to the development of the American colonies, the national progress was greater than in other parts of Scotland. Okay. A valuable publication referring to a earlier century's immigrants and including those whose passages were assisted by the government of the day is that by John Camden Houghton, London, 1874, entitled The Original List of Persons of Quality, Immigrants, Religious, Exiles, Political Rebels, and Others, who Samuel Smith wrote on 25th March 1746, asking permission to have letters from His Grace the Duke of Newcastle, Secretary of State, to the governors of the Leeward Islands, Barbados, Jamaica, Maryland, and Virginia, setting forth the powers given to the contractors over the rebels and recommending the contractors to the governors of those places, evidently the intended destinations of the transported prisoners. So all these places, the Scots, the black Scots, you know, they got all these races, make comments, oh, you're African. Nah, not by history. Not, remember, wars, migration, and enslaved, and I'll even put deportation on there. Okay? Right here. These were transported to Montserrat in June, but 2 died on the passage. Okay? Let's see. The transportation in 1745. Okay. Exact list and description of 150 rebel prisoners shipped at Liverpool on board the veteran John Rickey, master for the Leeward Islands, which were taken near Antigua, if I'm pronouncing that right, the 28th of June last by the Diamond privateer Paul Marcel, commander, and carried into Martico the 30th, 1747. Please note below, DO stands for ditto, okay? Look at some of these names. So, you have William Bell, profession, he's a weaver, county, Berwick, 5'4". You remember Professor Boyd Dawkins said the original inhabitants were around 5 feet, you know. Look at his description. Remarks: black, curled hair, strong made. That's a so-called black man. Dougal Campbell, servant, Lockerber, if I'm pronouncing that right. Brown, complex, well-made, ruddy, so-called black man. Okay, was he given a slave name? No. Dougal Campbell, same thing. Servant, Brown, ditto, the same. We got John Campbell, same thing. Swarthy, there we go. We see the word swarthy. So he was a dark-skinned man, because that's what swarthy means. Then you got Alex Davison. He's a herdsman. Ruddy, slim made. Okay. And, you know, you can just look down the list. Brown, lusty, you know, just different descriptions of so-called black people. Okay. Same thing over here. You got John Smith, Goldsmith. Okay, ditto, ditto. Ruddy, Brown, well made. George Bain, ditto. This is a swarthy man. Okay. Right here, same thing. You got Andrew Langer, dark complex, well made, healthy. James Lawson, laborer, well made, slender. John Troop, dark, sickly. George Samuel, bookbinder, brown, pale, slender. James Donald, same thing, brown, complex, well made. Andrew Matthew, dark, so it means he was swarthy. And so forth, okay? Donald McDonald, servant, swarthy, okay? Black people. So these were not Africans. All right. Transportation in 1745. Reverting to the transported prisoners, there are no statistics as the rate of mortality of these in various colonies and plantations to which they were sent. Bishop Hay in his Jacobite memoirs tells of 81 Highlanders who were tempted to submit in Inverness and were thereupon placed on board the king's vessel and subject to ranch treatment in them. Those who survived were sent to Barbados, and were only 18 were alive 3 years after out of the 81. Okay. John Fiske in his Old Virginia and Her Neighbors rather delights in the circumstances that many Scottish prisoners became colonists in America. 150 had been sent to Boston in 1670 to Virginia. In the years 1650 by Cromwell, because this bastard, this white man, deported the black Scots. You know, like I read earlier, religious prisoners, so forth. Okay, who captured them at Dunbar. The rising of 1715 was responsible for the deportation of about 1,000, and the rebellion of 1745 for probably about 1,600. It forced soldiers and indentured prisoners to be taken together. Okay. As to the latter period, Fiske says later in 1745, after the suppression of the Jacobite rebellion, there came to North Carolina a powerful reinforcement of Scotch Highlanders, among them many of the clan MacDonald, including the romantic Flora MacDonald, who had done so much for the young fugitive prince. Okay. How far the Celtic leaving due to the deportation has leavened the West Indian and transatlantic lump, it would be difficult to say, but in Cape Breton, there is published the only purely Gaelic paper in the world, viz. Mactella, the son of, okay, and it ends after that. Okay. Now, Mr. Benjamin Franklin's plea for a purely albino or white homeland. At about the same time, 1751, Benjamin Franklin, who was one of the founding fathers of the United States, a noted polymath, Franklin was a leading author, painter, political theorist, politician, postmaster, scientist, musician, inventor, satirist, civic activist, statesman, and diplomat, and allegedly a child pedophile. Okay, that's what I heard. You know, I believe it could be true. You know, they lie so much. All right, Franklin, perhaps alarmed by the growing number of so-called black people being imported as indentured servants from Europe, the black Europeans, and the growing number of Africans being imported as slaves. Okay, that book I have, Creole, New Orleans, Race and Americanization, 1719 through 1743, right here. Negro Land, an actual map that was printed in 1747 by Emmanuel Bowen. This is an authentic map. Well, not this, this is a reprint. But what do you have right here? Kingdom of Judah, or Wida, the slave coast, the Gold Coast, okay? That's why there's 3 archetypes here in the Americas. The Palo, Black American, the Negro tribes. You got the Black Europeans of nobility. And then you have the West African Judeans that came here, and the Igbos, different tribes as well, okay? So not every so-called black person is an African, okay? So Franklin, okay, I already read that. Let me see. Let's see. Early on saw the potential for those black people taking power. Franklin himself was the grandson of former indentured servant Mary Morrill, and he experienced firsthand how it was possible to climb from those humble beginnings to position of power. Thus, in 1751, he penned the following cautionary essay. But more importantly, Franklin's essay described a European population which is completely at odds with the albino or so-called white man's claim to teach. Okay. Digital history. Okay. And this is not made up. You can find this on the internet. And that's the problem with education. It needs a whole revamp. All them books need to be thrown away. Okay. Because a bunch of narratives. Let's see. Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they acquire our complexion? Which leads me to add one remark. The number of purely white people in the world is proportionally very small. All Africa is black or tawny, Asia chiefly tawny, America exclusive of the newcomers, wholly so. And in Europe, the Spaniards, the Italians, the French, the Russians, the Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion, dark-skinned. Okay? As are the Germans also. The Saxons only excepted, who with the English make the principal body of so-called white people on the face of the earth. I could wish their numbers were increased, and while we are, as I may call it, scoring our planet by clearing America of woods, nothing new, still going on to this day, and so making this side of our globe reflect a brighter light to the eyes of the inhabitants in Mars or Venus. Why should we, in the sight of superior beings, far from the truth, darken its people? Why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America, where we have so fair an opportunity by excluding all blacks and tawnies of increasing the lovely white and red and pale? But perhaps I am partial to the complexion of my country, for such kind of partiality is natural to mankind. I mean, you do favor your own. Well, at least some people do. You know, I can't say about this society because everyone's mixed up and don't know what is what. Okay. So definition of terms from above. So we have swart, Okay. Dutch, black. Darkly brown, tawny. Okay. To swart, to blacken. Swardily, blackly, tawnily. Swardiness, darkness of complexion. Swarthy, to swart. Dark of complexion, black, duffy, tawny. Okay. Describing people of color, black people. Okay. And let's see. So, Black Britain. After several hundred years of falsified racist history, as we have all been taught, there was no blacks in Europe, which is a lie, and that those that were there were African slave servants or African charity cases. The black research, like our own, has forced the lying so-called European albinos, whites, to make some grudging minor admissions like this. DNA study finds London was ethnically diverse from the start. Remember that show, Bridgerton? Okay. Talking about Queen Sophia Charlotte was the first black or mulatto queen? No. Mary of Scots, Anne Boleyn, just to name a few, all those were so-called black people, people of color. Let's see. While Europe's lying albinos foolishly ponder just how much truth they can afford to admit, we continue on with our research and sharing of the same. The black and brown royalty of nobility of Great Britain. All right. Let's see. Look at the memoirs of the Secret Service. John Mackey, King William, Queen Anne, so-called black woman. Okay. So right here, we have a fake white portrait of Black Charles Lennox, first Duke of Richmond and Lennox, 1672 to 1723, son of King Charles II. And this is a fake portrait. So this is a description of, like I said, Charles, what's his name again? King Charles II. Is son of King Charles II by the Dutch of Portsmouth, was carried by his mother into France, and in the reign of the King James, and left France in the reign of King William, when he declared himself for the religion and constitution of his country. He is a gentleman, good-natured to a fault, very well bred, and has many valuable things in him. Is an enemy to the Buffnels, if I'm pronouncing that right, very credulous, well-shaped, black complexion, much like the King Charles, not 30 years old. And what do we see here? Black complexion. What is this? Fake portrait. Okay? You can't make this stuff up. I ain't got no reason to lie. Fake white portrait of Black King Charles I, supposedly after the original by Van Dyck. Fake white portrait of Black King Charles I from the National Portrait Gallery, London. Okay. Fake white portrait of Black John Somers, first Baron Somers, 1651 through 1716. He was an English Whig jurist and statesman. He was Lord High Chancellor of England under King William III, and was a chief architect of the union between England and Scotland, achieved in 1707, and the Protestant succession achieved in 1714. Okay. Of a credible family in the city of Worcester, if I'm pronouncing that right, Let's just see. He is of a grave deportment, iffy, and free in conversation. I'll say that. Something of a libertine of middle stature, brown complexion, near 50 years old. You see this? They won't talk about hair. No, it's talking about his complexion. And we see this as a so-called white man. Like, Benjamin Franklin said, white and red. No, this man was brown complexion. So this is a fake portrait. Okay. I mean, the literature, you got to be careful, but man, they're not lying on the descriptions of these people. I guess people don't read. Fake white portrait of Black Daniel Finch, 2nd Earl of Nottingham and 7th Earl of Winchelsea, if I'm pronouncing that right, 1747 through 1730. Okay. How is he described? In his habit and manners, very formal, a tall, thin, very black man, or swarthy, because swarthy means dark-skinned, like a Spaniard or Jew, about 50 years old. So they're telling you the Jews were dark, were black people, okay, or like Spaniards or the Monaros, okay. And we see this is not the actual depiction. This is a false painting, okay. Look at that, man. Why all the lies? Let's see. Charles Duke. He was of middle stature, well shaped, very black complexion. John Duke. He was of middle stature, of a brown complexion, with a lofty look. Charles Duke. He is of a black complexion, not too tall as the Duke of Northumberland, Blumberland or Humberland. That's right, I can't read that. Yet very like King Charles, a tall black man about 25 years old. But I guess everyone was a slave that came from Africa, right? Let's see, Earl of King, can't pronounce that word. Just Earl of King. Okay, is of a black complexion, well made, not 40 years old. Okay, so forth. All these different articles about these dukes. They're people of color. They're black. Thomas Earl. Okay. Earl of Feverham. He's a middle-statured brown man. Lord Lovelace, brown man. George Lord, little brown man. Okay. So you see, it's a lot. Fake white engraving of the Black John Drummond, 1st Earl of and titular Duke of Melfort, 1649 to 1714. How is he described? He is tall, black. Can't pronounce that word. I'm trying to make out that word actually. But I don't know. He is tall, black, and stoops in the shoulders, or flops in the shoulders, something like that, and thin, in turn of 50 years old. So I'm going to read Nature Knows No Color Line. Surname and English names, color of skin, complexion and color, black, black man, brown, etc. Okay. Negro as a Moor. What shatters the theory that the English Moor comes only from Moor wasteland is that families with the name Blackmore and Blackamoor, which comes from Blackamoor, have the origin of English surnames, says the most natural and the one which best united the name of the person is that giving a destination which relates to his most conspicuous qualities. Color of skin certainly came into this category. So that's why we get the names brown, blackamoor, etc. Okay? Color and complexion, he adds, have given rise certainly to such surnames as Black and Black Man. Some families named Black and Black Man also have Negroes. Grand Mason names a Niger or nigger with 3 Negroes in his coat of arms. The Negro protégés of the nobility, and there were a good many, as we shall see later, were sometimes Christian blackamoor, which says lower comes from a blackamoor. He illustrates to say, therefore, the certain preeminent Englishman, as Sir Richard Blackamoor, 1650 through 1729, noted physician and writer, had a Negro ancestor somewhere. The British Museum catalog contains a number of writers so named. But overall, this makes a lot of sense to why you have a high percentage of Negroes or so-called blacks with brown and certain names, okay? A lot of those names were not slave names. That's the narrative they teach in these lying education systems here in America. But peace and shalom.